So, around this time last year, I spent all the money I made working in the summer, probably around $3,000, to buy a brand new gaming PC. So with an R7 1700X and a GTX 1080, you'd think I'd be spending most of my time on Crysis with max settings, or maybe Arma 3 multiplayer pulling a total of 35 frames per second, maybe playing around with my new HTC Vive that I picked up. Something that can really push the boundaries of my setup. Nope. I still play AAA games, but most of what I find myself playing these days are these little indie games like Faster Than Light, Into the Breach, Papers, Please, and Enter the Gungeon and Dead Cells on the Switch. So why is it in an age where AAA games are looking better than they ever have before, I keep falling back to these minimalist, graphic, indie-budgeted niche games? In short, I think the answer comes down to just some good old-fashioned game design. Now, I'm a firm believer that limited resources breeds better creativity. In short, if you have a problem that you can't just throw money or a huge staff of developers at, you have to think of a solution around that problem and craft your game around that style of thinking. Look at the movie Jaws, for example. Originally, they wanted to have this giant animatronic shark flying through the air, thrashing about, eating up people, but they never really got the animatronics working, and it just didn't look good. So instead of having it front and center for the whole film, they hid it under the water, and in these really tight close-up shots that kind of hid the true look of the shark. And what that did was give the shark a brand new forbidding tone. You never actually see it, so it's just there under the water, and your imagination fills in the rest. If it was just a shark swimming around freely killing people, it would kind of destroy that illusion and completely alter the tone of the film. And I think the same principles are at work in some of these indie games. I mean, would Faster Than Light work as a third-person RPG in the Unreal Engine with loot boxes and microtransactions? Probably. But does it need to? Absolutely not. Instead of focusing on widening the scope of the game to include these incredible graphics, the developers focused on the elements of the game that actually mattered. In Faster Than Light's case, the gameplay and the art style, and polishing them to perfection. Cut out everything that doesn't need to be there and focus on what's left. The gameplay, the visual style, and in a lot of cases for some reason, an amazing soundtrack. When I think of a good game bloated with stuff that doesn't need to be there and just ends up dragging down the game instead, I think of Ubisoft. Before they even have a story in place for one of their games, they're trying to work in a parkour system and a crafting menu and then the hunting simulator on the side and so on and so on. And what you get isn't the best experience of all these features, but a bunch of weak additions to the game that distract from the main focus. And the end product you get is the worst experience of all the components just jammed together. And that's a shame, because oftentimes some of their games are pretty fun. They're just bogged down by these mindless additions. When you're making an indie game, you should be able to sum up the whole game into one compact sentence, like Into the Breach, for example. Turn-based isometric bug stomping. Or maybe Russian toll booth simulator for Papers, Please. Now try and accurately do that with the Assassin's Creed Origins. You're this dude from Egypt who has like a feather and then a book, and he runs up the buildings around Egypt. I think it's Cairo. Or, no, it's too long. You're an assassin from the Secret Order whose goal is... No, it's still too long. You kill people? Hotline Miami. Once you start with this really strong core gameplay idea, you can lock it down and start adding on bits and pieces that make the difficulty skyrocket and actually add challenge and replayability to the game, while still keeping those core principles intact. Look at Enter the Gungeon. It starts off as a simple game where you shoot people and you jump over bullets, and that's about it. But then by floor 4, it just turns into this... Oh my god. No. Everything starts off simple enough to make sure you have the controls down, but once that phase is over, the mechanics start building off of each other instead of being completely separate from each other. And the game really forces you to master all the parts of the game if you really want to have any chance of beating it. If you're good at aiming but you can't dodge, you're going to die. If you dodge but can't aim, you're not going to kill anything. Papers, Please is probably my favorite example of this. It starts off as such a simple premise. You just stamp passports yes or no if they're from a certain country. But as the game goes on, you get these entry tickets and permits and work visas and diplomatic visas, and this innocent little toll booth suddenly turns into the last line of defense for your motherland, which is plotting against you because you're trying to sneak out your family due to the political climate. I just wanted to stamp some passports. But more important than any of that is these games are just straight up fun. If they aren't too pretentious and focus on what actually matters, a $5 indie game can turn into a 300-hour time sink that can outlast any game of the week released by the AAA industry. By keeping your scope narrow on gameplay, it's really incredible just how good games can be. I'm sure there are exceptions to all the things I've listed here, but one thing that's constant in every low-budget indie game is a killer soundtrack for some reason. Sound is an often overlooked part of the visual entertainments, but it's one I put a lot of stake into when analyzing a game. If the visual style isn't enough for you to get in the mood of the game, really get hooked in that atmosphere, a fitting score is just what you need to push you over the edge. A good soundtrack will have a song you can't really recite to a friend but will recognize the instant it was played. It's not just the music played over the world you're experiencing, it's part of the world. It really is the experience. And for some reason, every indie game I've played since 2005 has had a kick-ass soundtrack. Honestly, I could talk in depth about each one of these games for hours, but that's not really the point of this video. I just wanted to say that in the current state of the video game industry, it's a ray of hope that 5 or so games I find myself playing cost me less than $40 American, but have more replayability and interest to me than a $140 pile of garbage that was Destiny 2. And that's not an over-exaggeration, by the way. Destiny 2 and all its DLC, that came out to be $140 to the poor bastards who actually bought it on release. Anyways, as long as these games keep getting made, I'll keep buying them, supporting the developers who actually deserve it, and playing the games that actually had care put into them, like Dead Cells, for example. I haven't actually put enough hours into it to say which side of the fence it belongs on, but I have a strong suspicion it's going to be a jam. So if you wanted to see a review for that, or an in-depth video on any of the games I mentioned here, maybe another one that you wanted to see me take a look at, let me know in the comments, and I'll honestly strongly consider it, because it just means I'll have an excuse to play these games some more.